Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the latent image, which is a technical term in photography. I'm going to explain what it means technically, and then I will attempt to show how it is already present in a number of discourses to do with continental philosophy, post-representational critique, but also with some concerns around language, and some maybe connecting to the two presentations that just happened. It is about some kind of attunement to the photographic image. Maybe it is the thickness of the image that can be found in this latency, or maybe it is the acoustic qualities of the photograph that can be tuned into. But I will start with a short rant on alchemy and photography. So, alchemy is the doctrine of transubstantiation applied to matter. According to the Catholic dogma, the miracle of transubstantiation can appear only during the Holy Mass. The alchemist takes the principle of transubstantiation and applies it to turning stone into gold. The alchemist, in fact, is not only turning stone into gold, but also turning religion into a form of scientific knowledge. The difference between alchemy and the scientific method is that the alchemist does not start from the casus sui of science, the formula A equals A. Alchemist's starting point is the presence of spirit in matter and the coexistence of spiritual and material worlds. For the alchemical magic to work, both the physical and the spiritual processes have to be perfectly aligned. This parallelism between spiritual and material can suggest that alchemy is the practice of Spinozism. What alchemy helps us to recognize is that another model of scientific discourse is possible. It is at least possible to imagine science that does not exclude rhetoric and sophism, but on the contrary, connects with the irrational out of understanding that this too constitutes reality. This alternative science will be perhaps less self-assured, but it might be able to contain in itself both madness and magic. I propose to name this scientific method photography. Now, the latent image. So latent means hidden. And in photography, you normally will encounter it in very technical books that deal with the chemical processes that explain in quite specific terms what happens during exposure. So I'm just going to present a very kind of simplistic Wikipedia style explanation of how it works. But essentially, if you imagine a camera, which is a black box with a shutter, when the shutter opens, light enters this black box and hits the film or the light-sensitive material on the other side of the box. So in that moment, a latent image is formed on the film. Then the shutter closes, and the latent image then is contained within the film. There is already molecular change in the silver halides embedded in the light-sensitive material, and these molecular changes caused by light are obviously invisible to the eye, and they are contained within this black box. And this latent image can be preserved for as long as this camera or this film canister is completely hermetically closed. Yeah. So here you have the photographic image already fully formed, however, completely inaccessible to human senses. Yeah, but it's all there. The light reflected from the object already touched the film, the connection was made, the body made a mark to another body, and it is preserved there, completely unknown to us. Now, that part of the process is generally kind of glossed over in books on photography. And because the more exciting part is how later we take this latent image and anthropologize it. So we put in some chemicals and develop this molecular image into something we can take into the daylight and look at. Yeah, but this process of anthropologizing the image and making it visible to the human eye is not free of charge. It carries certain price, and the price we pay is that we destroy the invisible, the hidden, the latent image. Yeah? So there is always this bartering going on in the process of making a photograph. If you want to have a photograph that you can look at, you have to destroy or kill or sacrifice the latent image. And these are not just poetic words, because what is being destroyed through the chemical processes is precisely the contact between or the trace of the object left on the film. It's the trace that we need to destroy in order to get a picture that we can look at. Yeah? And it's quite interesting to think why this quite, spectacular part of the photographic process, why this is never discussed in any great length. We are told that after the exposure, the film needs to be developed, and then we get the print. And by the way, well, I'm not going to get into it in detail. Now, with digital photography, the process is essentially the same. You have, instead of film, you have light-sensitive diodes, silicon cells, they react to light, and again, this packet of data, of raw data, will need to be processed by algorithms in order to convert this data to information. Yeah? In a sense, something very similar happens with the chemical process as well. The data, which is from Latin datum, which means to give, it's almost the phenomenological moment of the thing reaching out and touching the surface of the film. This contact has to be destroyed in order for information to emerge. And information suggests something formal, something framed, something kind of humanly accessible. But I'm more interested in this original, primordial, non-human image of photography, because I think that it's generally probably more useful to think about photography as something that precedes human agency. Is it far-fetched to suggest that photography is older than us humans? Photography seems to be connected, at least to some extent, with photosynthesis, which appears to be the basic technology of life. So on that level, I think it's quite interesting to ask, so what is this original photographic process? And I hope my description suggests that this original process is kind of, well, first of all, it is invisible. There is nothing to see there. And any attempt to peek into this latent image, so let's say, if you are tempted to open the dark slide and look inside, or open the camera, destroys it immediately. Yeah, so that's like the gaze of Orpheus in Van Gogh, if you remember, in The Space of Literature, when he says that Orpheus needs to look back at Eurydice when he brings her back from Hades, because he used to look into the night of the night, He needs to see where his own art is coming from. And looking at where art itself is coming from also destroys the art, destroys the beloved object. But the desire to do so is immense. So here again, we also have, I think, this connection, maybe a little far-fetched at that stage, between the latent image and desire. But I think already yesterday there were some indications that the questions of origin and desire are kind of bedfellows. So maybe I will have a chance to develop that. Now, obviously I cannot show you a latent image, but I thought maybe it's possible to show you this. So, it could be that it's a, it's a false move, and then in which case we move to another slide. But I thought that this is a way to try to get at the way latency can operate. I think, I feel that Wittgenstein, especially in his very early work, was quite sensitive to the way poetry generally fails when it tries to deal with the unknown. And art probably generally fails when it tries to do that as well. I hope it doesn't sound too harsh. But so the only way is really to not to deal with the unknowable at all. And in that way, nothing is being lost. So, and in this poem, which is very simple by this by a wonderful Norwegian poet, Olav Haugum, is it really about the cat, or is it about everything which the poem is not about? And could it be that what the poem is really about is, well, we can describe it as the latent image or the latent poem. So, when Wittgenstein writes in the introduction to the Tractatus, he basically says that the book is bound to be a failure because it attempts to express something that cannot be expressed in words. He says we should have to be able to think both sides of this limit. So both to think both the side of what is possible to think and of what is not possible to think, which is of course impossible. And I guess that's why he considered the project of the Tractatus a failure. But perhaps what is not possible in language is possible through this photographic figure of the latent image. Because it's not a speculation, it's not a metaphor, it's not an idea, it is a real thing, absolutely physically present, albeit invisible, and for us, unknown. Yeah? So we cannot think what cannot be thought, but we can be in the presence of the latent image, which perhaps requires other tools than the thought that Wittgenstein here is talking about. But just before I move on from this question of the latent image, I want to show you how normally photography manuals deal with the question of latency. So you see, the girl discovered that the latent image formed in the silhouette layer could be revealed by treating the plane with a fuse of depth. Now, there's no need to dwell on the kind of alchemical connotations of the photographic process. This is a very familiar territory to everyone. But it's just interesting that in the whole, like a 400-page book on the origins of photography, that's the only time where the latent image is mentioned. And quite recently, Michel Frisol, in this monumental new history of photography, which he wrote for the French government, what, 10 minutes? He says, no impression can be seen, not even the slightest beginning of the picture, and yet the picture already exists. There is there in all its perfection, but in a perfectly invisible state. And that really reminds me what Rubinstein says in one of the letters he wrote in the First World War when he was soldiering on the Eastern Front. Very similar, don't you think? That kind of goes back to the cut point. It doesn't try to say the unsayable, and for that reason, all the unsayable is preserved in the poem. Okay, so it is quite curious that in 200 years of photography theory, the latent image, as a figure of thought, never achieved any, never acquired any significance, never attracted anyone's attention. And yet, you know, obviously photography is usually instrumental in all these discourses that we associate with truth. And for that reason, I guess, the fact that the original truthful image has to be destroyed in order so we can get something we can look at is a kind of inconvenient truth. And I think Nietzsche gets into that very nicely when he talks in Gay Science about the this curse of the modern mind. If you are tired from reading, just read this what I highlighted here. To treat it similar as identical. So Heraclitus said that nature likes to hide, but it seems that photography also likes to hide. It likes to be invisible. Perhaps it is true about all images. Images like to hide. Images are generally hidden. They are generally unknown and unknowable. We can make them visible. We can anthropologize them, bring them to the eye, make them accessible to our human vision. But whenever we do that, we pay a certain price. And the price is that we destroy the actual image. What we are left with is a representation, which is identical, that we can digest through our human categories of time and space. But the original moment of contact between the thing out there that was in front of the lens at a certain moment in time and the imprint of this thing left in the film, this latent image, has to be destroyed for the visual image to appear. Something similar also, I think, bothered Lucie Irigaray when she writes in the Speculum of the Other Woman about the cave, the Plato's cave, that was already mentioned here. And she said, but isn't it just happening too quickly that they're in the cave, then in the sunlight? But what about the passage? What about the move in kind of the corridor, the passage, the neck of the womb? She calls it the forgotten vagina. And she indicates that there is a certain misogyny attached to this forgetting of the hidden origin. So too soon, too quickly, we want to believe that knowledge is somehow linked to light, you know, and the light-giving properties of light. And Nietzsche actually, that's exactly what he means here. Just because something is life-giving, it does not necessarily mean that it's true. And so the refusal to acknowledge the latent image links to the general preference of our Western metaphysics to ideas rather than to praxis. So what will it really mean to engage with the materiality of photography? to really look at the image as concrete, we will need to have a way to engage not only with what the image represents, but also with what it actually is. Here it is quite important that for Heidegger, for instance, the question of the is has a certain moment of concealing and revealing. So the is, or the event of the now, is always imbued with a tension, with a certain kind of toing and froing. So there is a duality to it. It is never just a simple question of identity, when something is equal to something else. Rather, it is a moment when something is being concealed, and this act of concealment also reveals. So it is possible that the latent image allows us a very different access to this figure of Heideggerian thought. Through the discourse of revealing and concealing, Heidegger gets to the question of difference as the real underpinning force of Western metaphysics. In Identity and Difference, for instance, Heidegger asks, so what would it take to really step out of metaphysics to the extent that it is at all possible? And just like Rubinstein, he ultimately concludes that somehow it is not possible because we are bound to language. But I'm suggesting that the latent image is really, to the extent that we can have some way of non-metaphysical art, some way of non-metaphysical communication, then it will have to take the form of the latent image. Do I still have 2 minutes? 2 minutes. In that case, I will just look with you at this last quotation from Benjamin from the Article Translator. Again, it's long, but maybe not so much to read on the screen. He talks here about the non-representational aspect of language. And he says there is something in language that transcends, the kind of remainder to language that is beyond what it represents. And I tweaked it a little bit. I replaced a few words just to drive the point home a little sharper. So to grasp a genuine relationship between a thing and an image, we need to get beyond the so-called visual perception. So what for Benjamin is translation is precisely that non-representational aspect of the image. In a sense, I think here he develops this whole Nietzschean thought from gay science. And so I want to show that photography, in a sense, plays a role, maybe an unacknowledged one, in forming this way, informing and informing this way of thinking that keeps seeking something which is beyond the representation. And with photography is perhaps the most interesting place where this non-representational can be found, because it exists in photography not conceptually, but really figurally. But this figure just happens to be invisible. So that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I ask the speakers to come to the front? A little discussion. What might seem like a wide arc in a panel, one of the things we're trying to do with this is to have you become sensitized to this relationship between the frog and the prince, between how sound, music, image, shadow works, and that it becomes partly this notion of latent, and then it goes into, I think, physics that you were addressing. So there's a bit of a move here. So I want to just throw that out to sort of show, to say there's a bit of a stitching going on here. Did anybody want to raise the first question? Yes.
We'll go with Mark.
Mark.
No,
Danny, I have a question. Are you familiar with the Porphyry effect? Porphyry was a German physicist, and he discovered that when you cover one eye with a gray filter, that there is a delay between the two eyes. So this effect is used in 3D technology. And my question is, this also indicates that there's a certain latency in our visual apparatus. And how would your thoughts apply to this? Because what you're indicating is that there's this technical process of photography which has a latency out of a certain technical environment. Because what I did not get in your speech is which role time plays.
Oh, yeah.
Because if this would be instantly, would there still be a latency? Or is it seems because the problem for me occurred when you try to match analog technology with digital technology. And the question is, how fast has it to be in order that latency, that we may speak about latency?
That's a great question, because I had a section precisely about about time. But yeah, the point is that within the latent image, time operates in a different register to the time we are used to. Generally we think about photography as kind of reaching back to the past and dealing with the past. But the latent image is, to me, that the time of this image is much closer to the Nietzschean idea of the eternal return. It's a kind of immobile time, maybe, a kind of time, more eventful time, rather than linear and chronological. Because it's the moment of complete and perfect stasis, which at the same time contains within it the event of leaving a mark. And the latent image is very, very dark. As Flamme O'Brien says in The Third Policeman, it was dark as inside a razor blade. That's how dark it is inside the latent image. And inside this darkness, there is no linear time. There is nothing linear there. And with the digital image, I think the point is that in the digital environment, time is completely non-linear. Time is instantaneous. So it's not even time, it's something we need to call it in a different word. Time is instantaneous, and space is multiple.
Did you want to comment on that?
I was just trying to understand the image and time, because it sounds like you're describing something which we can't see or ever experience. And from my impression of the idea of time would be that we then have no idea, because time is a construction. It's a construction that we bring. Or maybe we think there's a substance that's beyond us that is time that we dip into and experience arcs with. But if we have no, I guess I'm just curious what kind of reference we would even have to
think about Schrodinger's cat. We don't know what state the cat is in. We can still get quite a lot of mileage from the experiment itself. Yeah, and I also think that the time of Schrodinger's, the experiment of Schrodinger's cat also suggests a very different relationship to time, because between the two observers, one, say, inside the chamber and one outside, they operate in very different temporal registers.
But he's talking about quantum physics, he's not talking about time, the time you're referring to. So Schrödinger tried to find a picture in order to show how different quantum physics works. And it was especially the aspect of time which he wanted, the difference in the aspect of time he wanted to illustrate. So it's somehow not working to bring in this cat now, because it refers to a completely different reference system of time.
Joe,
I just had a kind of picking up on
can
your point.
you show?
Yeah, just picking up on Martin's point about this kind of latent image in vision, and I was thinking how vision functions is that what is projected onto our retinas is then bounced between the eyes, and there is a latency there. There's that gap between looking and what we see, and do we all see the same thing? So there is some kind of other kind of latency going on there as well.
That's a really good.
Can you show?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So me and my brother made a periscope that allowed you to look at your own ear directly, like both eyes looking at your ears. And while we were prototyping the design, if you brought the mirrors too close to the eyes, because the body knew the mirrors were there, because you've got this sense of proximity as one of your senses, it couldn't make a distinction between the image you're supposed to be seeing far away and the image that's too close. And we also had this issue where people would put them on expecting to see the size that it is, but it's a cumulative distance thing, so actually time has passed when it goes through. And it reminded me of an article I read by Roger Shatter called Proust's Binoculars.
Did you hear that right there?
Proust's Binoculars is an article by Roger Shatter about different experiences of time, and Proust's, I'm going to find it really hard to remember.
I'm going to find it. I'll probably find it quite hard to remember, but something to do with total deja vu or all times in the same time with a single object. That Proust described one of his characters walking through a garden, and he looks at the hedgerow and he sees the hedgerow in his memory and in reality simultaneously. And in Proust's Binoculars, Roger Shattuck describes the distance between the eyes. He makes a comparison between the distance between the eyes in stereo vision and the distance between two different times that you're experiencing simultaneously. I just thought
it's an aside really, just a comment which matters to me, and I hope it might be interesting to other people. But around you're talking about music earlier on, which is it relates to latency also. The difference between analog and digital recording. So the vinyl record, which is a real object and a musical object, and any kind of file, so a CD, MP3, computer, or whatever, which is not a real musical object. It's a series of ones and zeros. So that's interesting in terms of fetishization. With the latency, if you like, there's latent music in a record, but it's a real musical object. There's latent music in a file, which is not a real musical object. Well, let me just, I'm almost done. And that also, for me, is very interesting in terms of the latent image as a fetishized object and a totem. We've been talking about placebos, and we've been looking at some very lovely jewellery made from meat and from manufactured rubies, all of which are sort of totemized objects. And in that sense, the CD or the record represents some kind of latent totemized object. Also, wouldn't it be interesting if you had photographs that had never been developed in a dark space as jewellery, so that the latent image then itself becomes a magical totemized object?
I was just going to say, I think you can't say that, right? I think that it can't really be said that records, CDs, MP3 files have anything to do with music. You can say that they're an audio, they produce in the end an audio representation of music, but they're not musical objects. And I think that therefore the distinction between something like a record, so like the current fetishization of like an analog versus a CD, or that's a better example is put an analog like a record versus say like a 24-bit 96 kilohertz anti-rate recording. The dynamic range is much better, and we have the opportunity to really compare both. The digital recording is better, but I think that what becomes interesting is that the question of sampling rate, it's not only about like Nyquist frequencies and aliasing. This idea about temporaneity that I was trying to introduce is actually a way that you could argue, I think, effectively for records, having something that CDs don't. But it's not about ones and zeros versus grooves in plastic. You know, this
Yeah,
in the air is all air. Right?
My feeling is that, and the reason I would say a record is a musical object, is that you simply need to put a pointed thing on it and turn it at a certain speed, and you hear a representation of music. You cannot do that with ones and zeros. So in terms of what I'm sort of describing here as the real world, it exists musically in the real world in a way that a file can never exist musically in the real world.
Okay, there's a couple people now, the real world, the really real world. I love all those things. It's going to be Stuart, then Jivan, then Sophie, then Mattia, done. Okay, then we take a coffee break and then we have fantastic David too speaking. Okay,
So this is something else about latency. I've been exchanging emails with Latent and Noah and the site.
can anybody hear?
Can you hear me?
Michelle?
Be happy if you can't hear me. So I've been exchanging emails with Alchemy and Noah, who's a cognitive scientist and philosopher, about something called the chronostasis illusion. The chronostasis illusion is where, because our eyes saccade, so every time we move our eyes from one place to another, we're blind. Right? And this is important to me, because as a magician, if I can make somebody's eyes move, I can do a sneaky move while they're not while they're looking somewhere else, but while their eyes are literally moving, because that can be 0.2 a second. Right? Now, there's a famous illusion where if you look at your second hand of your watch, right? So then you look away, and then you look at the second hand of your watch. If you catch the second hand of your watch just after it's moved, right, you can get a second that feels like 1.2 a second. So you get this long second. Right? And the cognitive science explanation is that when your eyes land, you backfill into that space, right? what you land on. Right? But Alvin Noah argues in a different way, that when you see a cat behind a fence, you don't fill in the missing bit of the cat, you ignore the missing bit of the cat. So my question is, if you ignore the missing bit of the vision, why does the chronostasis illusion work? Why do you get a long second? Because that doesn't seem to fit his...
Don't answer that.
Is inactive. No, it doesn't fit his inactive.
That's very interesting. That's a fantastic point. Jivan.
It only works with the quartz watch though.
Jivan.
At the door in the other campus, we have a Parkside, a new building. At the door, reception, there works a man who wears a ring with a black box in it. So it's set like a gemstone is a black box. Had a lot of conversations, and the black box contains a prayer. So he's a Muslim, and he was there when the prayer was encased in the black box. And I was thinking of the rabbi who wears the black box, listening to the voice of God. So coming back to your black box with the latent image. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about the physical proof that there is an image in there, because what makes you believe this, and B, are those images stackable? I mean, you know, if you continue taking photographs and never open the box, would there be sort of like...
Yeah, I think the whole point of thinking about the latent image is to free ourselves from this quite suspicious attachment to visual images as the only form images can take. And I want to suggest, well, even if we just take photography, there's so much more going on than pictures. You know, there are processes. The processes themselves involve design, they involve production, they involve interactions. And the latent image is just one very material way to get to something which is not an image in the familiar sense, and yet it is a fully formed image. How do I know it is there? Because it is there. And there is, it's not, well, it's just a shot in the sky. If you open it to see, it's gone. You know, that's why I think it's also quite charged poetically. And I kind of want to suggest the latent image is quite an interesting concept to use outside of this technical description of photography, because I think it kind of applies to poetry as well, for instance.
Jonathan, do you want to say something?
Well, in respect that poetry has the gaps.
No, in respect to the fact that your work was on the shadow, it had a weight to it. Does that play into this at all? Okay, good. So,
I think what you're talking a lot
you
about.
shout.
I think what you're talking about is materiality between digital and analog. And when you said that the digital works in the same way, I would say that the analog has a time difference, a really big time difference. Well, if you look at when Julia Margaret Cameron was doing her early photos, and she had literally an hour to develop them. And one of them, she didn't know what she was doing, and she wrote that she slightly ruined one print, and a halo came up, which is a bit like the sort of latent image, and then she repeated that in lots of her photos. And I just think that there is a temporality which is slightly different between analog and digital.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Good. Attila?
I was wondering if this book for Mike and for Daniel, the two presentations converge. If the idea of latency, particularly attached to photography, is not what is keeping a traditional form of ontology still open. It's material on one side and.
Can you come up here and take the mic? Your voice is getting
I was wondering if the latency of the image, so the latency, especially when applied to photography, but for sound it would be similar as a problem. It is not precisely what keeps the problems of ontology still open. So it keeps alive something that we could sort of move out from.
Okay, that was a nice comment. Okay, good.
What was the question?
What was the comment? No, what was the question? Let me just make one last remark then, which is that in Foucault's work, he's got a thing that internally called an ecstatic fetish. And the fetish is something that Jonathan alluded to. The fetish in that work is that which, if it comes to light, disappears. And it was a way in which he was dealing with this attack on identity politics, identity this, so it's a very clever argument where he puts forward this notion that it exists, it actually exists, whereas the latent image you're saying doesn't exist. He was saying the fetish exists, and we've seen the outfits, so it definitely exists, but if you decide to bring it to life, if you decide to really take it with both hands and wear it in the sort of outside world, it will lose all of its meaning. And to me, a number of arguments that are being put on the table here are trying to dance around that, or in fact even discussing it. Latent image, the temporaneous, is that what it is? What is it? Your temporaneous? Temporaneity. They're not the same thing, but they're trying to speak to something that is the is. It's dealing with this thing that is the materiality of the is. And I think that that's kind of an interesting way, same as yours, John, with the question of the shadow and with the frog. Anyway, I know that we're not meant to go directly to a coffee break, but I think that it makes sense to have one right now. Right? Are you okay with that? But let's make it a 5-minute coffee break as opposed to a 15-minute coffee break, so that you get coffee and then we have David on. Thanks.